So welcome everyone to this TELedvisors webinar. Both of the presenters today have come from the HERDSA 2021 conference program, and one of the reasons why we looked at that as TELedvisors is to see what's currently happening in the TEL space, and just to make sure that people's work was appreciated and had the visibility that it deserves. And firstly is Ameena Payne. Ameena is an online educator in the disciplines of social science and businesses at Swinburne Online, and also an early career qualitative researcher at Deakin University. She has taught in both higher education and vocational education and earned a graduate certificate in Learning and Teaching, Higher Ed, Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, and a Cert 4 in Training and Assessment. She is a Master of Education Research Intensive student at Deakin University, and under her personal focus on humanising online learning, her professional interests include learner analytics, assessment design, and the topic of this webinar, which is technology-enhanced feedback, as well as equitable education and education reform. Ameena is a Fellow of Advanced Higher Ed, Associate Fellow of Higher Ed Research and Development Society of Australasia, HERDSA, and an Australian Institute of Training and Development 2021 Dr. Alastair Rylat Learning and Development Professional of the Year Excellent Awards finalist. So welcome, Ameena, and I'll turn over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Wendy. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of this unceded land in which I reside, and I pay my respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to other Indigenous people present. As we're engaging in contemporary knowledge, teaching, and learning, I would also like to pay respect to knowledge embedded forever within Indigenous ways of knowing. I would love for you all to consider why it's important that we reconsider feedback approaches and processes. Feel free to pop your thoughts into the chat. The ways in which learning conversations are delivered are a significant part of the educational experience. And today, digital is no longer a buzzword, but it resides at the heart of higher education. As such, many habits of the past are being replaced to make way for our increasingly digital world and our diverse student cohorts. Technology has been reworking the ways in which institutions, academics, and students engage and communicate. Yet, teaching staff in general use computer technology for academic endeavors in astoundingly limited ways. And the ways in which teaching staff have continued to provide their views on student assessment have largely remained the same. Whether this is out of habit, stubbornness, fear of change, or a combination of the three, things do not have to be this way. So feedback is largely perceived as a mundane chore, but it's widely acknowledged as being a vital element within the learning process for students, and it continues to be a demanding and challenging aspect of higher education policy and practice. In the digital age, written or text-based feedback is the most used feedback method in online higher education. And text-based feedback tends to focus on justification of students' marks, and it's rarely ipsative, and even less often is it emotional. So a screencast is a digital video recording of your computer screen, and for the purposes of online education also includes audio narration, so really similar to what's happening here. And the addition of screencast feedback can enable deepened learning due to utilizing dual channels, like visual and oral for cognitive processing. Now, a critical uptake in the issue, or a critical issue in the uptake to online higher education has been a lack of adequate support, interaction, and engagement with teaching staff. And teaching gaps and deficiencies are highlighted in digital learning environments. So it's really important that we shift away from practices that aren't adequate in fostering community, effective communication, and ultimately aren't enhancing the student learning experience. Studies have shown that students rate the overall quality of feedback more highly when video-based feedback, screencast feedback, is provided in addition to written comments. And the findings have demonstrated that the addition of screencast feedback is preferred by students, it's more effective for the reception of assessment advice, it's more effective at building rapport and belonging, and students find it more useful, and they tend to use it more. Screencast enables feedback to be more specific, detailed, and individualized, so we're not just pulling from a comment bank. And additionally, the amount of feedback communicated to students is significantly greater than the amount communicated when we're typing, without being more time-consuming. So it's been said that scientific speculation and inquiry begin in story through incidents that cause us to pause and reflect. So I recall taking a blended method calculus class in college, submitting my work, receiving my mark, and my feedback. So I failed the assignment, and the electronically the text-based feedback on my work just stated wrong with no further explanation and tons of X's on my comments that were telling me that my submission was incorrect, that my answers were incorrect, which I knew because I failed, right? But, I don't think that the instructor was like yelling at me and saying wrong as they were typing that my answer is incorrect, but it really felt that way. It was really discouraging, and I remember feeling like I was terrible at calc, I wanted to drop the class, and I also thought, well, I'm not really sure what I need to do with this information because I don't really know what was wrong. I know that my answer was wrong, but why? So surely there's got to be a better way to give students feedback, right? So in my unit, on a hunch, I decided to, so fast forward some years later, and I'm undertaking my grad cert course, and I'm putting together an e-portfolio, and the unit convener provided screencast feedback, and I just thought it was brilliant. I'm being walked through my assessment. It feels like I'm in the same room somehow with this instructor, even though this was a cloud-based course, an online course. The aspects of my e-portfolio are being explained in alignment with the rubric, and I can tell by his tone which aspects he's finding particularly interesting and some aspects that I haven't probably clarified well enough. So I can really see my work through his perspective. And my own experimentation and subsequent research was prompted by these experiences. And there was a lot of uncertainty that came with doing this. And in 2019, I began implementing screencast feedback within the fully online higher education courses units that I facilitate. So on a hunch, I decided to have a look to see whether screencast feedback was impacting students' marks in comparison to some of the other units which were only using text-based feedback. So the maroon colored arrows indicate the assessments in which I provided screencast feedback. And then the yellow arrow from A2 to A3 indicated that these two assessments were nested. So these were the most heavily weighted assignments in the unit, and A2's feedback is particularly important to help scaffold towards A3, which is worth 50% of students' final grade. So we know that grade inflation exists, right? But at Sunburn Online, we're undergoing moderation and really rigorous validation. So I don't think that's what's going on here. But again, this is purely speculative. But what was really important to me was that my students were becoming receptive to the feedback. They were actually listening to it, and they were understanding it. They were generating their own internal feedback, and we were both enjoying the process. Now, before I get to this question, I want to clarify that video feedback can still be information transmission, and it's a possibility that video feedback can be just as confusing or even detrimental to students if it's not pitched right. So the key, just like with text-based feedback, is clarity and warmth and enthusiasm. So I was one of the few institution-wide who had ever implemented screencast feedback, and I was the only teaching staff in the foundation first-year units that was implementing it. So based on my students' formal evaluations, which I've put up here, and their unsolicited feedback and the improvements that I was seeing to their work, I would say that it is effective for learning. Now, data also tell us that students who earn better marks consider withdrawing from their course of study at a lesser rate than students who achieve lower grades. So is it possible that the quality of feedback that screencast affords leads to higher marks, which can lead to decreased attrition? I would love your thoughts. Before I talk about the benefits, I do want to address some of the key challenges with screencast feedback. Due to time, I'll touch on them briefly, but I'm happy to elaborate further afterwards. So firstly, I don't want to pitch screencast feedback as always being the most appropriate option. It really depends on your circumstances and your students' circumstances. For example, if there's heavy construction going on, in your home, and it's consistently noisy, then it's not going to be a good option. Your mic's going to pick it up. No one's going to hear what's going on. Small interruptions aren't a big deal. People cough, yawn, a dog barks. No problem. It doesn't have to be perfect. But it is something to, constant noise is something to consider. You also want to ensure that you have a decent internet connection and speed. Otherwise, the uploading is going to be a barrier. You also want to consider your students' circumstances. My institution is fully online, so an expectation is that students do have reliable internet. However, the digital divide is something to consider. You want to meet students where they are, so to speak. Now, screencast feedback mimics dialogue, but it's not inherently dialogic. So what I strive to do is employ questioning techniques in my feedback and ask students to respond. This is really more so of an exercise to get them to think more deeply about the concepts. Lastly, this wasn't an expectation of my role. I had no guide and I learned as I went along, but given the positive response to having implemented it, it's now being widely encouraged at my institution, and I've helped put together a sort of guide for the instructors at Swinburne Online. Now, screencast is fantastic for conveying complex information, and it allows us to be more expressive. I really do feel like I'm in conversation with my students, and my students have expressed the same when watching. I like to build on their previous work, and I might say something like, in the last assignment, an area for improvement was this. I can see how you've taken that on board by your response to this. And rather than just diving into the feedback, I state how it's going to be approached. For example, I might say, "Hi, Wendy, you've made an excellent start. I've highlighted in green the areas that I found particularly well written and most interesting, with a quick note on why. So rather than focusing on your strengths, this video is going to focus on your areas for development." When I frame feedback in that way, the students know what to expect. Lastly, I'm spending far less time marking, and I'm able to convey so much more feedback in a 3-minute video much more easily and clearly than I could do when I'm typing. Now, in a few months, I'll be sharing an executive summary of my thesis project, which explored the feedback literacies of academic staff and the shift to technology-enhanced feedback. My research revealed experiences of feedback literacies held by 10 education teaching staff from higher education institutions in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Korea, Oman, United Kingdom, and the United States, many of who've been recognized for championing effective student-centered teaching practices. I also have a book chapter scheduled to be published in December this year, which will discuss screencast feedback and the relational considerations. Lastly, buy-in is key in my opinion, and it's important to develop a collaborative, innovative, and holistic approach to student feedback, and that requires leadership at all levels of the institution. And any of us can make an impact. I believe that screencast feedback can return the focus onto personable interactions in digital spaces. My experience has been that screencast feedback has improved my teaching practice, enabled dialogue, increased engagement, which helps stem attrition, and improves student learning. Finally, it's a basic but necessary point to make that this is about the student, so we really need to focus this in terms of student situations and their needs. Furthermore, times of great uncertainty call for greater flexibility and innovation. So I'd like you to consider if we're going to take bold steps towards action, innovation, in the midst of uncertainty, the choice is ours. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much, Ameena. That's a great presentation. Just looking at the chat here, there's one question. Henk might have picked up some more, but there's, Henk said, would there be benefit in requiring students to explicitly respond to screencast feedback? So I'm sort of thinking about the dialogue and what you've seen in the dialogue space.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the barriers right now to screencast feedback is, and well, it's not really a barrier to screencast feedback, it's a barrier of our role and what we're paid to do. So we often don't have time, right, to respond back to students if they reply to a message on their feedback video, for example. So like I mentioned, I do ask my students to respond or think about it in some way, but I don't often have the time to reply individually. I love to have those conversations in the discussion forum if they're willing to have that. But I think an area for us to really think about going forward to make feedback dialogic is to enable instructors to be able to have the time to respond back to students.
Great. I've just got another question. So just when you say screencast, you're talking about more than just recording your head talking. Is that right? You're talking about having the assignment or information in the background while you're giving verbal or video feedback. Yeah.
Absolutely, Wendy. That's right. I actually don't put a video inset of myself into the screencast. I just simply put the student's assignment up there and then they can listen to me. I choose not. Some people do put the video inset, but I find it a bit distracting. I really want students to focus on their assignment, and I'm often also going to different tabs. I might pull up something in the learning management system and say, go to module 2 and reflect on this here. So that's why I think it's a bit too much to have everything there.
Yeah. Henk, was there any other questions that you saw in the chat?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Tom Worthington is asking how long does it take to record a 3-minute video? How does this compare with typing the same amount of information? Given the media has shown to make no difference to students' learning in the past, is video worth it? This is a bit of a yes.
Yeah, sure. So that's a really good question. I would say that when I first started, right, it did take a bit longer because I think I was really wanting everything to be perfect. So I might have re-recorded a couple of times. It doesn't matter now. Now I just go through it and I pause a lot. I'm going to talk about this in my upcoming research. There's some really great tools as well that the screencast technology affords. So I would say if I'm recording a 3-minute video, it takes me, I would say 3 minutes, and then it might take me 30 seconds to upload it. When I first started, it probably took me longer because again, I was trying to make things too perfect.
And that, are you reading the comment from Colin?
Yes, yes. And then the no difference to student learning in the past, is video worth it? That question. Um, yeah, well, I don't agree that it makes no difference to students learning. I actually think that it makes a huge difference because it's more relational. And that's my research is going to dive into this as well. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that.
There's a question, Ameena, from Colin about whether you've explored any tools that support more of a circular feedback process. So like feedback fruits, for example, or
I've heard of feedback fruits. So at Swinburne Online, we are looking into a more dialogic or circular feedback process, and we're looking into Kaltura, which is quite similar.
I was also wondering about VoiceThread, because VoiceThread is particularly designed for circular feedback or dialogical in both instruction and conversation, and it can be used for feedback as well. So I've seen lecturers that the student submits a video, for example, reading a text in a different language, and then they provide audio feedback within that recording, and then the student can use the same platform. Are you looking at anything like that?
Yes, and it does, like you mentioned, Wendy, what I thought was really key is that it meant that the assignment was not an essay, right? The student was submitting something, a piece of work that was a bit more creative. So I think that when the assignment goes beyond, just submitting an essay, then we can be a bit more creative with the way that we provide feedback, and it also makes, audio video feedback more appropriate.
Thanks. Is there any other questions?
There's one more comment from Oriel, which is about feedback literacy, and that students don't really know what to do with feedback often. Can you say a little bit more about how people can develop feedback literacy?
Yes, absolutely. This is the topic of my of my research, in fact. So, in my opinion, are we talking? Sorry, I just want to clarify, Oriel. Are you talking about students' feedback literacy or staff? I mean, they are tied together, but just for a bit more clarification.
I think student feedback literacy. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think that first of all, students don't always know when feedback is happening, or they're a bit hesitant to seek feedback. And I think one of the benefits with screencast or audio video feedback, it allows you to be really explicit. So you can a lot more explicit than you would in text, and you can also ameliorate your tone as well. So it really helps develop students' reception to feedback, in my opinion, more than just a quick comment would. So you're right. Yes, students don't often know what to do, and I think that it's not just about the feedback as well. I think it's a holistic approach to assessment. So we need to have formative assessments as well, which I think also help develop student feedback literacy.